What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Down to the fingers. We're going to be getting into Triad Arpeggios and their inversions and the conversions thereof of the major to the minor, from minor to diminished, and then how augmented sneaks in there, and how to sort of like break up this information so you can quickly access it and use it as an improvisational tool rather than it just being like some useless random piece of information that sits out there. Can you play diminished? Probably. Can you use diminished in an improvisation? Most likely not. And that's what we're going to tackle today, plus a couple of the big theory things. Obviously, starting off with choosing the key, G major, bite me. Right, of course, that opens a lot of doors. You can start seeing them as scale systems. Don't forget that, right? There's the Ionian position into Dorian. Third degree, B in this case, Phrygian. Oh, Mixolydian. Right, based on that fifth degree, D in this case, the E, sixth degree natural minor, or the Aeolian position into the major again for Ionian. Ending in Aeolian there, because why not? That's the home base, if you will, with respect to the natural minor, the minor pentatonic, and blah, blah, blah. But you get the idea. Just based off this sequence of notes, I can now start breaking down the fretboard in a number of ways, right? Whether it's on the A string or the D string or on the E string kind of situation. I don't need to look anymore because my brain automatically remembers the spaces of notes with respect to the major scale and all the rest of that. But you get the idea, right? That's kind of where you gotta get comfortable with the ideas. First, you start off with the lowest position. That one right there. So that's me basically marrying up the Lydian position, 3 notes per string, and the pentatonic from Aeolian and Mixolydian. Okay, so, and then of course this one. Now you heard me say the Aeolian and Mixolydian position. It's because these scales, they actually share synergy. Moving from Dorian to Ionian feels natural. This is the tension part. This is the release part. So when you're practicing tension and release, you're like, I want to move from a Dorian idea into an Ionian idea. Just throwing that out there, right? So of course, now you're like, okay, this Ionian position has this E-type chord associated with it. If I move up to Dorian, it's minor, of course. Based on the second note, the fourth note, and the sixth note. This one is 1, 3, 5, then 2, 4, 6, then 3, 5, 7. Yeah, exactly. If you're like, that's diminished, you're like minor thirds. Oh, okay, that's helpful. We'll get into that, but you see where I'm getting at here? Knowing this sort of basic sequence on one string that you can now extrapolate out based on the cage system. If the first degree here and the 1 position, if you will, right, is the 2 position, sorry, 3 position, right, 4th, 5th, 6th, then you got diminished down here, and then back to the 1 again, right, this sort of eternal sequence. I could start again, right? If I start here, this is the 4th degree, right? So that's going to be major. That's going to be 5. And then, of course, 6, diminished again, and major. All using A-type chords, right? There's E-type chords. I could move them over to the C-type chords, right? If I start here. But obviously doing the minor and all the rest of that can get a little dicey. So obviously we're going to concentrate on the arpeggios at this point because it makes a lot more sense and I can just move my fingers as necessary to the chord. But that's just it. This E-type chord from the first position, which also replicates, by the way, up here at 4 and 5. Now imagine this chord from the cage system has 5 positions. When I move the chord up here, it'll have the exact same 5 positions in the same spots relative to this chord. And when I move it up here, same exact 5 positions, all relative to this chord now. When I move it here, they're relative to that chord. So there's gonna be one here, here, here. When I move it up here, now I gotta jump up the same distance, here, 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 right? Everything moves, but it all starts down here. And then I can just take this entire information, move it up here to 4 and 5, and just apply the same exact methodology. Done. Now I've done the 1, 4, 5 kind of deal, but obviously there's the E-type chord. It puts me at this root here. There's my D-type chord. There's the C, right? That's a cool one. Not necessarily the C chord. I kind of skipped out there. Right, then there's the A-type there. There's the G-type there. Right, I could do it again if I'm here like this. Right, that of course is replicated up there, the same type of G. They all work in exactly the same way. If that's the G, that makes this the E. Let's make this one. Okay, the next one. So they always stack in the same exact way kind of situation, right? So that's what gives you the inversions. There's the root inversion based on the E-type. The next inversion, the first, is going to be based on the C-type. Then you're going to have the A-type version or the G-type one. How do you like to see that? I like to look at it from the A because that makes more sense. So obviously the G-type and the E-type are basically from the same root notes, so you don't really need to remember both. Pick one and just be like, oh yeah, no, I can also do that from here or here. And the next one, right, then the next one. So on and so forth, right? So of course now I just want to convert those chords into the actual arpeggios. Moving up to this one. Right, of course, moving up to this one here. Right, and of course, back to the root again, right? So once I get that far, of course, I can now start to manipulate these arpeggios. So I get all the inversions with respect to the minors now, right? So if this is major, 1, 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1, which was that? 1, flat 3, 5, 1, flat 3. Diminished 1, flat 3, flat 5, not. Oh, 1, flat 3, flat 5, 1, flat 3, up another minor third, flat 5, up another minor third. Yes, you get it. 1, of course. So flat 3, flat 5, 1. It's all minor thirds basically stacked on top of each other, right? Flat 3, right? Minor third. Tritone, that's just an inversion of a minor third, meaning 1, that's a minor third, but from this note here back to the root again, that's the tritone. Yes, they're just basically mere opposites, if that makes any sense. Right, so, and then of course you can move up to the next one. You're like, okay. Oh, sorry. Right, then you're like, next. And you're like, okay, so then you're like, okay, now I've got those out, but essentially the first one, this guy, happens naturally at the natural minor, the 6th degree. So I need to move it here all the way up to 6, right? Moving down to the 3rd degree. That's from the A-type chord, obviously. C-type. A-type as a minor now. That's an E-type as a major, right? And then, of course, I've got minor as a C-type. I know, all starting from the 1st degree. So now in your mind, you're like, okay, look, I've got this pentatonic scale. I've got the arpeggio. major and minor. Right, I've got the scale. Okay, so I think you're getting the big picture there, all based around the first degree, correct? And you'll be like, okay. Okay, so there's me factoring in the last little chunk there, which is the harmonic minor structure around it. Another very, very, very important scale. You're going to use a lot of notes borrowed from that one. That's why I like to throw it in there all the time. I didn't actually realize it's powered because I'm like, I don't want to sound like Yngwie. But if you just kind of keep up with it, essentially, you'll be fine. You don't sound like Yngwie. You're like, oh, that's where that note comes from. Very important. I showed it before with the major minor paradox where I was like... Okay, so that's where that note came from, obviously, is the idea that I'm now sort of doing the flip-flopping and borrowing it, if you will, from the harmonic minor. But that's another lesson again altogether. So the key point to remember is that when I'm starting off doing the majors, it's at 1, 3, and 5. And then back up to 1. When I'm doing the minors, it starts off in the root. If I jump down here, second inversion, right? First inversion, root. Other ones, major. Okay, so there's the sort of broad strokes with respect to major and minor, diminished, of course. Starting on the 7th of the major scale, go from the root, half step down. Inversion A. Inversion B, moving up a minor third, of course. Inversion A, up another minor third. Inversion B. Oh my God, shocker. Minor third. Inversion A. Then inversion B. Sit there at the 7th degree. Minor third. Minor third. You can play the minor third here if you want, but then what are you going to do? Move to the tritone, and then all of a sudden you're in a bit of an issue there. That's where you're like, minor third, minor third, minor third. Tritone. Minor third, tritone. Okay, so if I put them in the right order, the arpeggio works out. That's awesome. Right, and again, minor third, tritone, minor third, tritone, minor third, right? So, and again, you can see me playing the symmetrical minor thirds climbing. That's 7th degree. Dorian position, 2nd. The 4th degree, you're like... Okay, so that's, I realized I shouldn't have done that, but that's me doing dominant 7 into diminished, right? So that's why it becomes important. You're like, oh, I can do diminished at the 4th degree? That opens a lot of doors you don't realize right now. Start practicing that stuff right there, you know, and you'll be like, man, I can't believe I slept on that one. And you'll be like, I can now do the symmetrical version rather than doing this clunky triad. You're like, now you can hear the obvious shift there between the two, right? Where I was kind of like doing the diminished stuff and then moving back to the pentatonic, kind of resolving. Now it doesn't quite work out as well when you don't have the music going, but still the principle is the same, right? Same thing with augmented. Now listen, that's part of the harmonic minor system. Right, so I'm taking the 1 and this, and it's now major thirds. I'm going to do it here, right? Major third, 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 all in relation to, of course, the G major scale here, right? Now, obviously, some of the major sort of intervals are going to conflict with the minor sort of structure of the scale itself, so don't be too stressed out about it. But the thing to remember is effectively, even if you went to the next one, major third, major third, major third, like even this minor third, it can't exist in the same realm, if you will. So now you've got, I was going to say the inversions don't really matter as much with respect to augmented, because quite frankly, unless you're playing over top of an augmented chord or you're sneaking it in there in a very, very sneaky way, you won't be using this one that much, but still, you have to learn it, obviously. Up the major third, right? I'm sorry. I know I couldn't let it go. I was like, oh, I got to resolve it. I shouldn't have done that. And then I changed my mind twice in a row and I just fail. Okay, but you notice what I did there? That's actually an important point, is at the very end, even though I should have just played the original one, I decided to start changing it over, obviously, because you want to resolve from a position of tension, but I should have just kept it the same. My bad. Okay, so that effectively covers all the big stuff, right? You choose the parent key. Break down the cage system. So exactly, if you're like, the 2 chord is minor as this triad, that's going to give me this first, right? Moving up, first inversion. Next one. And yeah, of course. Can't do it with the mic, but there it is, right? So, third degree. Yes. You're like, oh, look. Right, of course. Now, all of a sudden, you just heard the Phrygian flavor there, right? Now, it doesn't sound like a major scale anymore, did it, right? Did you see that? So, all those arpeggios, of course. And you're like, if you like this one here, you're like, that's the Ionian position. That makes that Locrian. Okay, so again, knowing where you are eventually will become very, very, very useful when you start messing around with these things, because you're like, this is effectively the 6th degree, right? That's where that normally happens. I might be superimposing it over top of the 3rd degree or whatever it is, right? But the fact of the matter is it normally happens there. So I'm technically seeing it as the 6th degree. Which now puts me at the first inversion for the 5th degree chord, right? From here, right? Here's this one. Right, there's this natural minor, there's the relative major. I know that you're probably like, what? It moves every single time you move to a new position, the Dorian. If you have this minor configuration based off the 6th string, you're going to get everything related to the Aeolian position. This pentatonic, or this one, Dorian, of course. Oh, look. Right, so there's a lot of ground to mess around with there, but of course you're like, oh, look, the arpeggio. You like the inversions, right? You're at the, if that was 6, that makes this 1. The next one would be at 3, right? So you're like, oh, Phrygian. Right, so I think you're getting it now. Is that once you start to see the one position and then you understand cage and everything else, the inversions, you can just be like, okay, here's this arpeggio I'm normally playing. That's the 3rd degree. Now this also happens at Locrian. You might be like, I'll do the Locrian one. Now listen, obviously that dominant 7 arpeggio from the Locrian position does not exist normally at Phrygian, but because of the way the arpeggios work, I can see it as Locrian and then just insert the appropriate one. Do it again, right? Right, mixing and matching with the major there with diminished. So you're going to have to play around with the sounds to sort of tweak it out and whatnot, but there it is. That's probably the biggest part about the music foundations is after you're like, okay, I can start on the 1st, 3rd, and 5th of a major scale and play all majors. Right, then I can make conversions. This becomes... Right, and then you move to the next one. You're like, if that was 3, 5, 1, flat 3, 5, 1, right? Come on, you love me right now. If this is 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, flat 3. Yep, I know it, right? So, and then of course you're like, okay, so this is 1, 3, and 5, and this one is 6. What's the next one going to be? And then you're going to be like... Right, that's me doing them over each position, right? Kind of situation, just climbing down, starting with the root minor. That note is, of course, inherent to this 2nd inversion major. Of course, moving down into the minor 3rd inversion, or sorry, 3rd degree, but the 2nd inversion into the 1st inversion major. And of course, 1st inversion minor into the root. Okay, and then of course just start to understand that later on you're going to turn this into a minor 7. Done deal. Right, 23 minutes. I think I'll just shut her off right there, right? So I kind of stumbled around a little bit, but again, choose the parent key. Build your scale. In this case, the major scale makes sense. Layering the scale systems. And you're like, oh look, I'm at the 5th degree. That's going to give me this G-type chord. That's the A-type. Correct? There's the C. Right, and you're like... Up one more time. Now you can keep going and going and going, start attaching them together, but I think you get the idea. Then you're like, oh, look, if that was 5, there's 4. I feel like there's 4, 1. And of course, then you can do tension and release with diminished and just mess around with augmented until you start to feel comfortable enough to Try to work that in there, but diminished, absolutely. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Get on it, you lazy bastards. We'll see you in the next one.